Hey, welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. We are live right now on X. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Facebook. It is good to see you. Thank you for tuning into the show. We have a question. I have a question that I want to start the show with today. It's kind of a riddle, kind of a question, but it is not rhetorical. I want you to drop your answer right in the live chats, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or X. Here's the question. Are you ready? What do boys playing in girls' sports illicit marijuana farms run by Chinese international crime syndicates, American forests bought by foreign countries, and so-called Somalian refugees living in furnished apartments for free, paid for by you, the taxpayer? What do those things have in common? Drop your answer in the live chat. We'll see. I know some of you are going to know the answer to this question. I'll give you the count of three, and then I will tell you. Drum roll, please. 3, 2, 1. All of this is happening in the state of Maine. Yes, the state of Maine. You might think of Maine because of it's vacation land. You might think of Maine as delicious lobster rolls. You might think of the beautiful scenery. You might think of Stephen King, the author. He lives in Maine. But Maine, as small of a state as it is, 1.3 million, 1.4 million total population, has become one of the most prominent moments of President Trump's presidency thus far. We're a month into the 47th, the administration of the 47th president of the United States. And in one of the most prominent moments, Donald Trump put Maine's Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat, and a Democrat might be describing her ideology lightly. She is a radical, leftist, ideological feminist to the extreme. He put her in the spotlight after Governor Janet Mills defied President Trump's executive order, 2 executive orders actually, defied his executive order, reclaiming the definition of what it means to be a woman. To be a woman means that you are an adult human female. And if you are a biological male, even if you want to wear dresses, even if you want to wear lipstick, you are not allowed to claim to be a woman, at least on your passport and on your driver's license. And if you play sports in the public school or the private school system. That was President Trump's executive order, reclaiming the word woman from the transgender ideology that has threatened it in the past, especially under the past years, but especially under the Biden administration. And yet, Governor Janet Mills is defying President Trump. She's allowing boys to play in girls' sports. In fact, it's not just theoretical defiance. Over this past week, since Governor Mills announced her defiance, several boys who are competing in girls' sports have defeated actual girls playing in girls' sports in the state of Maine. And Governor Mills, at the governor's breakfast that President Trump hosted at the White House last week, we talked about this on the show as it was happening last week. Donald Trump looked out over the governors seated at the tables and he said, Maine, where's Maine? Is the governor of Maine here? And he found Governor Janet Mills in the audience. And he said, what you're doing, you better stop. You better stop allowing boys playing in girls' sports, especially because it's in defiance of my executive order. And Governor Mills responded by saying, see you in court, thinking that that was some sort of comeback. But the real comeback was President Trump's next comment. When President Trump said, well, enjoy your life after being governor, because if you allow boys to play in girls' sports, your political career will soon be over. He's right, of course, because the idea of boys playing in girls' sports is universally reviled by the American people. It's an 80-20 issue, which how many political issues really are 80% of the American people on the same page? Well, on this one, 8 out of 10 Americans do not want boys playing in girls' sports. And today, we have a new video of Governor Janet Mills in the state capital of Maine, in Augusta, Maine, running away from the press after a journalist dared to ask her a question about how she's going to justify President Trump's ultimatum. He said, you're going to lose the $280 million in federal funding that your state receives if you continue to defy my executive order. How is she going to justify that to everyday Mainers? Well, when she was asked, she ran like the coward that she is. We have that video for you today, and we have the journalist who posed the question to her. So make sure you stick around for that. Today's show is brought to you by Crowd Health. My husband and I ditched our health insurance. We quit. We said we're not going to be part of this corrupt system, this expensive system anymore. We switched to Crowd Health. Crowd Health is not health insurance. It's a better way to pay for healthcare through crowdfunding. Let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months. Go to joincrowdhealth.com. Use promo code Liz. Crowd Health is not insurance. I like to call it assurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. Use promo code Liz. Before we get to the cowardly Janet Mills running away from the press because she doesn't want accountability for her actions for letting boys play in girls' sports, let's talk about Elon Musk's email. This email, it's actually one of the simplest emails I've ever seen. We've all been in a situation where we've got an email from a boss that causes us, a jolt of adrenaline, causes us worry, causes us to freak out. But this email that Elon Musk sent on behalf of DOGE, this is not an email that should cause anybody to freak out unless you are not doing your job properly. The email to which I am referring is, of course, Elon's email asking federal employees to please list in the form of 5 bullet points what they accomplished in the prior week. Now, if you're an employee for a company, you should know what you do for that company. You should have goals, things that you're trying to achieve for that company, and you should have actions that you take to carry out those goals for the company that you work for and the role that you understand the purpose of. But apparently, government workers don't know why they're there. Government workers don't have goals that they want to articulate to Elon Musk, and they don't have actions that they're taking to fulfill those goals that they can articulate to their bosses. Maybe government workers don't actually do anything. And that's best case scenario, by the way. The government workers who are just lazy, they're entitled. They think that they deserve this job. They deserve a tenured career as a quote unquote civil servant because they were hired as a government employee when they were 22 years old. Those people are actually best case scenario. I would rather have a government employee who is simply wasting my money, as angry as that makes me, than a government employee who doesn't want to articulate to Elon Musk and to DOGE what he or she is doing, because what they are doing is nefarious. What they are doing is trying to impede the Trump America First agenda, the agenda that you gave President Trump a mandate to carry out when you elected him as president of the United States. This email should be the easiest task these government workers have ever had to achieve. And it's telling that mainstream media outlets, from CNN to print media, in addition to these government workers who, by the way, are going on CNN complaining, we don't have time to do these types of things, but you have time to go on CNN and complain about it, that they can't simply send a response to this email. The good news, however, is that the American people are totally on board with DOGE. A new poll from Heritage found overwhelming support among both left-leaning and right-leaning voters for DOGing the federal government, which means, of course, just identifying corruption and wasteful government spending. 67% of voters think that our federal debt is unsustainable. Of course it is. 60% say that DOGE is helping make major cuts. Well, of course it is. We can all see that with our own eyes. 58% say they support giving DOGE access to sensitive data in order to make these cut. Plus, 72% of Democrats support reducing government expenditures. So it's kind of similar to the situation with Janet Mills, who's taking this fringy, radical position on boys playing in girls' sports that actually only a fraction of really weird people in our country take that position. Most normal Americans are opposed to boys in girls' sports. Well, the same with DOGE. You might hear these government employees who think they're entitled to your taxpayer money in their bank account for life, regardless of what they're doing for you. You might hear them whining about it. You might hear mainstream media talking heads who want a big bloated government because they actually support and want USAID, for example, to be doing what USAID was doing to us, which is censoring us under the guise of protecting democracy. They were trying to stifle and cancel us. Well, the mainstream media talking heads who are mad that the federal employees are probably going to be fired want the federal government employees to be doing to us what the federal government employees are doing to us. But that's not the norm. You and I and our friends and our neighbors and people we go to church with and people we work out at the gym with and people that parents of of kids that our children go to school with, we're just normal. And we don't want government to be controlling us and censoring us. And even Democrats want to reduce the amount that government is spending. So don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype about that. There's actually a new report that shows that the protests that you might see against DOGE, you'll see a bunch of people protesting outside of government buildings saying Elon Musk shouldn't be doing this. This is bad. In red districts, even. The insinuation being that even Trump supporters do not support DOGE. They're fake. There's a new report from the Free Beacon that these protests against DOGE in red districts are astroturfed. This is what the Free Beacon says. The demonstrations drove mainstream media coverage of brewing backlash against the Trump administration as the lower chamber, the House, left Washington, D.C. for a week-long recess. Well-funded liberal organizations organized many of them. The George Soros-funded groups, Indivisible and Move On, were at the center of the demonstrations. Of course they were. Both groups, according to the Free Beacon, launched national mobilization efforts targeting the Trump-Musk agenda and Trump-Musk coup during the recess period. Move On said its members and allies will show up at congressional-led town halls and congressional offices around the country, targeting House Republicans whose votes will be crucial in opposing Trump and Musk's harmful policies. Indivisible issued, this is a George Soros-funded group, by the way, issued a Musk or Us recess toolkit that showed members how to find their local town halls and urged them to take the fight to Elon. It's fake. It's all fake. This is just George Soros showing up outside a Congress member's office or at their town hall and saying, we're your constituent. We don't want you to be doing what you're doing. Well, that's not real. So make sure that you provide the counter programming to George Soros's funded astroturfing. Make sure that you call your member of Congress and let them know that you are in full alignment with what Donald Trump is having Elon Musk do with DOGE to the federal government, because those calls, as we know on this show, those calls make a whole heck of a difference. A whole heck of a difference. Okay, let's pivot to Maine. The question, some of you, by the way, got the answer to that question correct. I knew you would because you are smart. This is why I know I'm biased, but the Liz Wheeler Show audience is, I think, the best in the business because you do your research, you know what you're talking about, and you knew the answer to the question, what do boys playing in girls' sports, what do illicit marijuana farms run by Chinese international crime syndicates, what do American forests bought by foreign nations, what do so-called Somalian refugees living in luxury apartments furnished at the cost of the taxpayer, what do all these things have in common? And the answer is Maine. This is happening in Maine. Maine is an incredible, not just petri dish, not just story. It's an incredible pass-through for the leftist policies that are originating in California and pass through Maine as an experiment before they are disseminated to the rest of the nation. So we are going to start by showing you a video of Governor Janet Mills running like the coward she is away from a journalist asking her a question. And we are going to bring on the show the journalist who followed Janet Mills in the, not followed, like followed, but ask Janet Mills the question in Augusta, Maine. We are going to bring him on in just a moment. But first, let me ask you this. How well do you sleep at night? Real peace of mind comes from knowing that your family is prepared. You can't sleep without peace of mind. And I know because my family faces threats. You need to be prepared for anything. At My Patriot Supply, America's most trusted name in emergency preparedness, they're offering you a limited time discount for their best-selling 3-month emergency food kit. This is not your typical survival food. Each kit provides over 2,000 calories and 100% of the recommended value of 12 essential vitamins and minerals daily for 90 days with delicious meals and extras. I'm talking chicken, beef, fruit, veggies, quality meals that last up to 25 years in storage and still taste like they're home cooked. If the pandemic taught us anything, it taught us how quickly store shelves, grocery store shelves can empty. Do not wait for the next crisis. Your 3-month emergency food kit includes free shipping, a disaster replacement warranty, and 24/7 US-based support. My husband and I have these kits in our basement right now because we are committed to being prepared for anything. The special discount is available for a limited time only. Visit preparewithliz.com now to secure your family's future with a $100 discount. If you order by 3 p.m., they'll ship your order the same day, so you have peace of mind immediately. Go to preparewithliz.com right now. That's preparewithliz.com for a $100 discount. Of course, we expected Janet Mills to run like a coward when a journalist actually committed journalism when he asked, how are you going to justify if President Trump follows through on what he needs to follow through with and withholds that $280 million in federal funding that goes every year to the state of Maine just because you want a boy to play in girls' sports? How do you justify that to your voters? Well, Janet Mills ran like a coward, and we're going to show you that video in just a second. But I do want to talk to you about ivermectin. It's an interesting case study, isn't it? The FDA told us it's a horse drug, it's a cow drug. Do not take ivermectin for COVID-19, they told us. Even though it wasn't just anecdotally, studies showed that ivermectin had efficacy against the COVID-19 virus. And we know the reason why they lied to us and gaslit us. Because if there were any existing medications on the market, like ivermectin, that had efficacy against COVID-19, they would not have gotten their emergency use authorization for their COVID-19 jab. So they lied to us to protect their profit. And who suffered? Well, not only did we suffer from the vax, obviously, but we suffered because we didn't have the ivermectin that we needed when we knew that we needed it. So my message is, don't let this happen again. I refuse to put my family in a position where this could ever happen again. That's why I'm proud to partner with All Family Pharmacy. All Family Pharmacy offers over 200 different medications and bundled emergency packages to ensure that you are ready for anything. At the heart of this effort is the Make America Healthy Again movement. It's a call to take control of your health and prepare for the unexpected. Don't leave it in Fauci's hands. If you find yourself in a pinch, All Family Pharmacy has you covered with overnight delivery. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. And because you are part of this movement, use code Liz10 at checkout for an exclusive discount. Again, that's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. Okay, so let's get to this video. This is Governor Janet Mills in the state capital of Maine. That would be Augusta, Maine, running from the press when she was asked to justify her behavior allowing boys to play in girls' sports. Let's roll that video. All right. We have the halls in the state capitol. And here emerges the governor herself.
Governor
What does she do?
Talk?
Stone-faced. She storms past reporters as if she's somehow better than reporters and doesn't owe them an explanation. This is the thing. And we're going to bring on Steve Robinson. He is the founder of Maine Wire. And he's been covering Janet Mills and her behavior and her staff and what the heck is going on with Maine for quite some time now. He's the one who took this video of Janet Mills, but doesn't it just show you the contempt that these politicians feel for us, that they think they can just put their nose in the air, just snooty as all get out, and walk past us as if they don't owe us an explanation for their behavior? Unreal. I'm almost glad she didn't answer the question because it shows us exactly how she feels about us. Steve Robinson is with us now. Steve, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, Steve, great video, by the way. Captures, I think, exactly how Janet Mills feels about us. But I want to talk to you about what's happening in Maine, because the trans stuff, we all saw President Trump look at Janet Mills and call her out and say, you're going to enjoy your life after being a governor if you let boys play in girls' sports. But the question that I posed to everyone who's with us live at the beginning of this live stream was, what do boys playing in girls' sports, illicit marijuana farms run by Chinese international crime syndicates, so-called Somalian refugees living in luxury apartments paid for by the taxpayer, and American forests bought by foreign countries have in common? And the answer is Maine. But I got to tell you,
I know the answer.
and I know the answer because of your reporting. So I'm going to toss it to you. Please tell us what the heck is happening in Maine.
Well, Maine has always been an interesting place for progressive experiments. Going back to the 1980s, when the anti-nuclear movement really started up, there were several ballot referendums to try to get rid of the nuclear power plant in southern Maine that ended up being successful in driving it out of business. And ever since then, the progressive left has recognized, why do a ballot referendum in California when you've got 50 media markets and you're going to have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, when you could just go to Maine and do a ballot referendum, or you can pass a law and it's going to be very, very cheap in terms of the political costs, the lobbying costs, the advertising costs. So all kinds of different ballot initiatives have found their way here. And that whole political idea of Maine being this easy testing ground for progressive ideas was really put on steroids during COVID, because we saw this exodus from cities like Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., and people were fleeing to Maine, which was viewed as a place that would be safer if the COVID-19 pandemic was really as awful as Fauci had said it was going to be. Maine would have been a better, more remote, rural place to hide out with a lower population. So we saw from beginning in 2020 over the next few years, there was net in migration of 30,000 or 40,000 people, primarily left wing people from the cities moving into southern Maine. And that helped change the politics of the state. We saw that in Governor Mills' reelection bid. You could almost see in the numbers, the number of net in migration compared with her increased margin of victory almost matched up perfectly. So it has changed the politics of the state, and it's helped cement the state for 6 years as being solidly controlled by a Democrat majority. So whether it's the trans thing or economic policies, healthcare policies, migrant policies at the in the city level, and also the state house, we've just had an experiment, for 6 years of what happens when a state goes full progressive.
Yeah.
I think there's a fair argument to be made that Maine is even more leaning into the craziest of the progressive policies than even California or
Yeah.
Oregon or any of these other states that are considered left-wing bastions just over the last 6 years. And Governor Mills, it'll be shocking for some people to hear, but she was the least radical of the primary field when she was nominated to run for governor by the Maine Democrats, and she is viewed as a centrist, as a moderate Democrat. There are Democrats in Maine who don't think she's extreme enough or far left enough. So they would say that the moderate Democrat title is very accurate for her. But as you're seeing on this trans issue, there are some issues where either her staff pulls her very far to the left, the left wing lawmakers pull her far to the left, or perhaps she just finds that the path of least resistance.
Yeah, I remember when she was campaigning, she was I mean, I suppose all politicians do this to a certain extent. Maybe not so much anymore, but historically they, in the primary you run if you're on the right towards the right, if you're on the left towards the left, and then in the general election you run towards the middle. And she did portray herself as being a Democrat that Republicans could vote for. But I appreciate your comparison of Maine to California because in a sense it's a funny comparison because Maine has such a small population compared to California. Obviously, the climate and the culture is very different, but it is similar in the sense that as we saw after the presidential election, California is not a true blue state. It's actually mostly a red state now with just a sliver of blue. That is where the population is concentrated, where the blue votes came from. But that's the same as Maine. Maine's blue voters are concentrated in the biggest cities, but a lot of rural Maine, upstate Maine, is very red, very conservative, very anti woke, and yet this is the governor. This is the governor in the state. I wonder if you can walk us through some of the reports that you have published on Maine Wire, about what's happening to the forests and foreign nations, not just foreign companies, but foreign nations becoming controlling owners of some of a huge percentage of forests and these Chinese crime syndicates that are running illicit businesses. Like this stuff is nuts.
It really is, and I'll say that the President Trump has huge support in the state of Maine, primarily in the
Yeah.
second district. And if you look at the vote totals from 2022 and 2024, he actually got more votes in the election in Maine than Governor Mills did when she was reelected in 2022. So he's arguably, has more supporters than Governor Mills does in this
Yeah.
state. He's broadly popular when you get outside of the cities. And like the rest of the country, the issue that she decided to pick a fight with him on, it's an 80-20 issue. So it's a loser for her. I think the only question is how she's going to find a way to tactically retreat from it because the state of Maine won't be able to survive without federal funding. The funding in question that we're talking about is $280 million for education funding. However, Maine is reliant on $5 billion in federal funding each 2-year budget cycle. So that's like 36% of our entire, government budget. There's just no way the state can function if the president continues to withdraw federal dollars. And as we're seeing with the DOGE stuff, the government is nothing if not sensitive to money being taken away from them. So I think President Trump ultimately wins here, but that's not going to be a victory for the people of Maine or the state of Maine because, as you mentioned, we do have some severe problems. The bell that you heard ringing in the video of Governor Mills running away from us, that was the sound of lawmakers getting ready to vote on the supplemental budget bill because we're $118 million short for Maine Care, which is a medical welfare program, which the governor has allowed the non-citizens to have access to.
Yeah.
That's overdrawn by $118 million. Looking forward to the next biennial budget where we're short $450 million. Again, we're way, way in the hole, and we're already spending far more than any previous budget. So we've spent all kinds of money that's come from Maine taxpayers. Plus, we've had $15 billion in Biden bucks sprinkled on the state, and no one knows where that money went. I mean, on an accounting level, maybe you could see what groups or NGOs it was transferred to. But if you look at the roads, if you look at public safety, if you look at the
Hmm.
school results, there's really not a lot of evidence that we've had effective government spending over the last years, even though it's increased significantly. So for 6 years, we've had this progressive tax and spend approach to government, and there's no indication, and there's no way of telling really that it's improved anyone's life here in the state of Maine. When it comes to the Chinese nationals, the Chinese cartels that are growing marijuana in the state, they're the other population that took advantage of COVID to come into the state. Except for rather than looking for Tony mansions in Cape Elizabeth and Rockland and Camden, like the people from Massachusetts and New York were, they were looking for bust out homes in rural Maine that were cheap and could allow them to grow marijuana illegally without any prying eyes looking at them. So far, we've been able to determine that there are well over 300 different properties that have been purchased over the last 5 years and put into service of illegal Chinese drug trafficking networks. And they also have some small businesses and flop houses in various parts of Maine that are parts of a part of the network. And recently, we've also seen Chinese illegal aliens arrested and placed in line for deportation for running illegal massage parlors. These were illegal aliens from China arrested for sex trafficking other illegal aliens from China in what appeared to be massage parlors. All of this flying under the radar, of course. For some reason, it's right wing or pro Trump to be opposed to the sex trafficking of illegal aliens these days. But the state generally has some very, very real problems, more significant than I think boys playing in girls' sports, which is wrong and should be happening. I agree with President Trump on that. But having a fight over this with the president is probably not a very good use of the governor's time if she's going to be in Washington.
I First of all, I would be interested in hearing from Governor Mills a response to the sex trafficking of illegal aliens from China by illegal aliens from China. But also, you said you identified 300 different locations where drug cartels from China were operating. How did you identify that?
Well, in I guess this was June, or I guess maybe September of 2023, there was a leaked Department of Homeland Security memo that was reported on by a border reporter who's now at the New York Post, Jenny Tare. And
Mhm.
it said that there were 270 properties throughout the state of Maine that were part of an illegal Chinese criminal cartel that was growing marijuana and selling it illegally. And when I saw that memo, it didn't include any of the addresses or any more specifics, but I said, well, if there's 270 of these places, I ought to be able to find them. So I set out attempting to, and I did. They're very easy to find if you know what you're looking for. It's a combination of real estate records, tax records, electrical records. We found that
Mhm.
some of these marijuana grows are so large and sophisticated that they're required to get commercial grade power entrances. And that creates a permit. And we were able to get our hands on all of the commercial power permits. And that was kind of like a Rosetta Stone to finding the marijuana grows throughout the state because they need electricity as much as they'd like to be off the grid. And then we drove around the state looking for them and trying to interview the owners or the operators. And since we started reporting on them and exposing them, there's been something like 40 or 50 search warrants executed at various properties throughout the state. A lot of them are just green card holders or LPRs or some illegal aliens, some asylum seekers who are
Mhm.
working at these houses. Very rarely do the people who are making money or benefiting from these schemes get arrested. So it's a very, very large, sophisticated, coordinated network. And I'll also say that Governor Janet Mills has a brother named Paul Mills, who is a real estate attorney. And we reported last year that he served as the real estate title attorney for a Chinese national who owns now an illegal marijuana grow in the central part of the state in Corinna, Maine. This was a marijuana, a gift transfer of this property. We think done as an attempt to try to protect the original owner of it, but it was an illegal marijuana grow that the code enforcement officer was adamant about shutting down. And Paul Mills just happened to be the real estate transfer attorney on this and didn't really have a good explanation for us as to why he would go way away from his usual area of practice and help out Chinese mafia drug traffickers. The governor has refused to answer our questions about this. No one has denied any single bit of our original reporting on it almost a year ago now. And in fact, we have some information we haven't reported yet that suggests that Mr. Mills actually increased his business dealings with Chinese drug traffickers in the wake of our report. So there's a sense that there's protection for those who are politically connected here in the state of Maine. And the governor has her eye on politics. Maybe she's running for the US Senate. I don't really think so. I think it's more of an ego thing with her picking a fight with President Trump. But there are some, again, very real problems here in the state of Maine, and criminal networks taking over rural Maine is just part of it. Recently, the Office of Cannabis Policy Director, John Hudak, handpicked by Governor Mills, admitted that he's been giving lucrative medicinal marijuana licenses to people that he suspects of being members of organized crime families. These are people who have been previously present when search warrants were executed, are the property owners at certain properties that have been, searched by law enforcement. And he's just going ahead and giving them a medicinal marijuana license, which is essentially a license to print money. So rather than effective law enforcement against foreign criminal elements here in the state, where in fact the Mills administration is helping them.
Which is, I mean, the whole thing is shocking in and of itself, but Maine has also been one of the states that has suffered the worst from the opioid epidemic and fentanyl deaths. I mean, the drug overdose situation is in Maine is abysmal. You go to Maine and there's almost nobody that you meet who hasn't had a family member or a friend or someone that they know impacted, harmed, maybe even killed by this drug crisis. So when you say that there were search warrants executed on, did you say 50 to 70 of these places? Is that state law enforcement or is that the feds?
That's almost entirely state law enforcement. Under the Biden administration, there was very little cooperation until Senator Susan Collins actually started advocating with federal law enforcement agencies to get involved with this.
Mhm.
When the Homeland Security memo leaked showing that there were these 270 locations in Maine, I'm told that the whole issue became toxic for federal law enforcement. It was something that you didn't talk about unless if you valued your career. I think that that dynamic has shifted because of
Mhm.
President Trump. I think you're going to see a much more robust law enforcement response to what they're doing. However, it's all been complicated by the Mills administration's decision to start giving licenses to members of Chinese organized crime. So it's going to be a tricky one for the feds to figure out. But I do think that you're going to see a change in law enforcement. It's really been mostly the county sheriffs who are popularly elected. They're the ones
Mhm.
who have been driving this. The state police, who Governor Mills is in control of, appoints their leader, they haven't really been involved in cracking down on the transnational criminal organizations in this state, not the Chinese cannabis growers. But I'm glad you mentioned the opioid problem here in the state. One of the things that we've seen over the last 6 years, thanks to Governor Mills and Democrats who hold the majorities in the legislature, is an embrace of this harm reduction approach rather than a law enforcement approach. And the harm reduction approach means that you make drugs like Suboxone and
Mhm.
Narcan, the opioid overdose reversal drug, you make those more available, and you operate needle exchange clinics to basically hand out clean needles. And in some instances, some states, some jurisdictions have experimented with safe drug use sites where people can just shoot up if they want to.
Again, came from California first and then to
Yeah,
Maine.
it did. We were this close from having it done here, but
Yeah.
that didn't happen last session. But we have done, rather than needle exchange, we do needle distribution. So anyone who wants to show up at a needle clinic can just get a box of 100 needles.
Ugh.
That's why there's needles in every single city in Maine. They're just strewn about the street. Portland, I think, is now doing a 5 cent, like a bottle redemption fee on needles in an attempt to clean up some of theirs. But we now see one of the big fights was over Suboxone, and that's a drug that's basically just an opioid replacement.
Mhm.
And under Governor Mills, the amount of money the state's spending on Suboxone through Medicaid has increased from $20 million to $26 million a year. So we've gone from having nobody addicted to Suboxone before Mills came into office to now we have 8,000 people who are very likely addicted to Suboxone, including people who are currently incarcerated. And again, this is a drug that the maker of it was penalized by the Department of Justice to the tune of $600 million for making false claims about its safety and efficacy. But this was one of the big things, her big accomplishments in fighting back against the opioid crisis was making Suboxone more widely available. So again, it just gets back to whether it's energy, immigration, law enforcement, the opioid problem. Maine, for 6 years, has tried every progressive answer to society's ills, and all of our problems got worse. People are
Yeah.
poorer, the economy sucks, energy prices are up, home heating prices are up, the housing crisis is out of control, school testing results are down. There's no measure by which the state of Maine has improved during 6 years, but the legislature so far has shown no indication of saying, these progressive experiments haven't panned out too well. Maybe we should try a different direction. In fact, the governor has just proposed a budget for the next 2 years that raises taxes on cigarettes, primarily paid by poor people, raises taxes on ambulances, hospitals, raises taxes on streaming entertainment services. And again, we're probably going to spend $14 billion as part of the next 2 year budget. When LePage was in office, the budgets were more like $8 billion, $9 billion.
Yeah, and Governor LePage, Paul LePage, is kind of like a Maine version of Trump. Just a
Yes.
guy who will say whatever is on his mind. Sometimes people are offended by it, but he's just extremely confident in his politics and in his behavior. He's amusing, I think. It'll be interesting to see if what he does if he wants to get back in politics. But this doesn't even take. We haven't even discussed the fact that a couple weeks ago, maybe this was a month ago, 6 weeks ago, on TikTok, especially, there were videos from Maine that went viral. And again, Maine, I think, flies under the radar. A lot of people think about lobsters or Stephen King when they think of Maine. They don't really think of, it being a petri dish of leftist ideology. But there were these videos that went viral on TikTok of residents of Maine. And some of them were Portland residents, some of them were residents of Lewiston, which is near to Portland or relatively near to Portland. And they were talking about how housing is unaffordable. They can't rent homes, they can't rent apartments because new luxury apartment complexes were being given to so-called refugees that were being brought in by Janet Mills. Janet Mills, who has promised to bring in 75,000 migrants to Maine by 2029. And just for context here, you all remember when Eric Adams said that they were going to bring in 10,000. And in a city the size of New York City, people freaked out. 10,000. How are we going to handle this? This is Maine, where the total population of the entire state is 1.3, 1.4 million. And bringing in 75,000 by 2029. I mean, it's not only crazy, it's already having an impact on Mainers' lives.
I mean, it's a delusional plan, and to be fair to the governor, this was her workforce plan, and she insists that it's just 75,000 workers. It's not 75,000 non-citizen workers, as what she claims. I don't know. She hasn't really done anything to bring individuals from Texas or Florida to the state, but she has, as part of this initiative, created the Office of New Mainers, which is going to be her
Right.
migrant resettlement agency here at the state level. And if you look at everywhere, every other state that has implemented an Office of New Americans, within a year or two, they're basically just another form of welfare or a welfare
Yeah.
coordinator for non-citizens. I think that
Well,
the
isn't that already
dynamic
happening based on what you said
it
before
is.
about the Maine Care? What was it, 20 million and now it's 26 million? Well, we can see that these people aren't workers because if they were contributing significantly to the state, then they would be paying for their own healthcare.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a complex topic. So the 20 million and the 26 million, that was actually the Suboxone cost increase. The migrant situation really began developing right before the COVID pandemic. In around 2018, 2019, there was a socialist mayor of the city of Portland named Ethan Strimling, who thought he was cool during an interview with the New York Times. He was going to stand up to Trump, and kind of like Governor Mills has right now, he was going to beat his chest and show how anti-Trump and cool he was. And he put up the welcome mat and basically said that all asylum seekers, non-citizens, whomever should come to Maine because they're going to get taken care of. And it turns out that the asylum seekers heard that message and they came to Maine. And the state did its best to take care of them. When the pandemic happened, though, everything was kind of frozen in place. federal government decided to just print billions, if not trillions of dollars and dump them into welfare programs. One of those was the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which was funded first by Trump and then by President Biden when he came into office. So the state of Maine was given these large transit trenches of funding and paid for non-citizens to live primarily in hotels and motels in South Portland for about 3 years. And it was a wildly expensive program, created a lot of problems for social services in the area, and overwhelmed the housing and shelter capacity for that area. The result was that you had citizens who were homeless living on the streets in tents. Drug abuse was rampant. The homeless camps that spawned in cities across the state were just open air drug markets and easy targets for drug dealers to go to, knowing that they were going to be able to sell their product to the marginalized individuals, the poor individuals, poor souls at these places. So it created a lot of problems for the state of Maine. And the priorities of the progressives in the legislature really were to take care of this migrant population, this asylum seeker population of about 5,000 to 10,000 individuals who had come to the state. A lot of them have entered the country illegally, but when they claim asylum, somehow this becomes a golden ticket or a new status where you're not allowed to criticize them and they should be able to get whatever kind of welfare benefits are available to American citizens. But it's created a real problem for the state. And one of the things that you've seen is the opportunity cost of focusing so much time, energy, and resources on the non-citizen populations has been the ignoring the rural poverty in the state. As part of our investigative journalism trying to find the Chinese marijuana sites, I spent a lot of time, drove thousands, tens of thousands of miles around the state of Maine trying to find these places. And I got to see a lot of the state of Maine. And I got to tell you, Liz, it's not looking great. There's at the same time you have the brand new migrant housing going up in the southern part of the state. You've got people living in mobile homes that are covered in saran wrap during the winter so they can stay warm. Houses are just falling apart. And I think the people in rural Maine feel like they've been forgotten. And so when they're struggling to be able to pay the electric bill, to be able to pay for their prescription drugs, to be able to keep the heat on, and they hear the governors down in Washington talking about boys playing in girls' sports, I can't knock them for being frustrated and thinking that maybe their political system has forgotten about them. And so when President Trump picks that fight, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people here in the state of Maine. But the migrant issue, for now, it seems like the priority, the spigot has been shut off. The new flow of asylum seekers has come really to a halt, and the project now will be about integration and assimilation. But the new Office of New Americans has it's got members on it who have basically said, we don't care about assimilation.
Right.
We've got a little bit of an Ilhan Omar thing going on with some of the members on the Office of New Americans, in that they're vocally saying that they represent their home countries more than they do the state of Maine or the office or the Mills administration, which I think is going to be a problem for Democrats here in the state because the tides are turning.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that this became a national story because there sometimes statewide or local stories I find to be even more interesting than federal stories because it's your neighbors, it's your family, it's people you know. That's I don't know, it's where the sausage is made in states, even though it's more dramatic at the federal level sometimes. But I think that this is a mirror of what happened in 2016 when Trump came in, even though, he's the billionaire who came down the golden escalator, he looked at these forgotten Americans in especially the white working class and said, I see that you've been abused and I'm going to stand up for you. Even though I'm not claiming to be one of you, I hear you, I get you, and I'm going to fix the problems. And I think maybe one of the reasons that this is becoming a thing, besides us just being very entertained by Trump, without fail, he can crush anyone. Janet Mills didn't stand a chance. And that's
No.
entertaining to watch, of course. And she's going to lose, of course. Also, it is that happening all over again because those people in Maine are being, especially the white working class, are being underserved and harmed and abused, taken advantage of by Governor Mills. And when they hear someone like Trump saying, actually, I'm not going to let Janet Mills do what she just did, which was this is one of your headlines I'm going to read. I mean, you know the headline, of course, you wrote it, but I want everyone to understand Governor Mills ordered a 245-pound male in prison who murdered his parents in cold blood. That's why he is in prison. she ordered this man to be moved to the women's prison because he claims now that he identifies as a woman. And meanwhile, saran wraps on mobile homes in rural Maine.
Yeah, that was Andrew Balser, who now goes by Andrea, and I have to imagine is among the largest individuals and probably the only one with a penis incarcerated in Maine's female state prison. That I think just an imposition on the rights of the female prisoners there, just like having boys participate in girl sports, is an imposition on all of the female athletes. But I think what you were talking about, the forgotten Americans who feel like their voice isn't really reflected in our politics. I think you had a dynamic like that going on in Maine over the last 5 to 6 years, where a lot of normal, people, working people who tend to be conservative, felt like they were kind of shamed or driven out of our political system, whether that's the town meeting or the school board or any kind of public participation, because they kind of had some reservations about the CRT and the trans stuff. They just didn't like the gay race communism. They were like, I don't know about this. But they were told, if you don't support boys in girls sports, you're a bad person. It's not just that
Mhm.
we have a policy disagreement or you disagree with gender ideology's views of human nature. You're a bad person if you don't support this. So they just kind of threw their hands up and said, you know what? I'm fine. I'm out of here. If you guys want to play make believe, I'm gone. I'm not going to be involved in politics. And that unfortunately allowed the hardcore fringe leftists to dominate our school boards, our city councils, our state legislature, and really just put the accelerator to the mat with some of their crazier ideas. And now we're reaping the
Mhm.
fruit of that. I think that
Yeah.
Trump coming back into office and giving these people a voice again is bringing more people into the fold. And I think that, especially with JD Vance as well, because he's in some ways a more articulate spokesperson for Trumpism than even Trump. I think that they're allowing people to feel safe again coming back into the political realm,
Mhm.
just having normal American conservative attitudes. I mean, the same kind of attitudes that Barack Obama or Joe Biden had in 2012 now would be totally unrecognizable in today's Democratic Party, especially here in the state of Maine. But
Yeah.
the transgender stuff really, I mean, the state has gone wild on that, and part of that I think is because of the people that the governor has surrounded herself with in terms of staff. She may have been more of a moderate candidate, but she's surrounded herself with some real, true progressive, hard left, true believers in the project. And again, the state is reaping that fruit.
Yeah, I mean, that's you have a story up in Maine Wire. We're not gonna have time to cover it today, I don't think. About it's her chief of staff or one of her chief advisors, Jeremy Kennedy, who seems like the most radical cultural Marxist that you can possibly put on a staff. And we know the staff members of politicians make a big difference in how they behave and where the politician actually lands on certain issues. I mean, maybe you can give us a brief overview of that. I highly recommend people go and read your website. It's really fascinating to see what's happening, and I think Maine, and this is my hope, but it's also my honest objective analysis. I think Maine is on the cusp of a comeback because it's not fundamentally a radical leftist state. It fundamentally is a I would call it a kind of libertarian state. It's not really like
Yeah.
evangelical Bible Belt type conservatism. It's kind of like a get off my lawn, I want to be self-sufficient type of conservatism, if you will. And when they fell for the false idea of be empathetic towards trans kids, otherwise you're going to kill them if you don't trans them, or make sure that you're teaching American history, but actually you're teaching white kids that they're racist. When people sort of fell prey to that and accepted even the migrant stuff, um, they realized that actually what they were sold wasn't what they were getting. And I think that there's about to be a comeback.
I would agree with you, Liz, mostly because Maine's at rock bottom. There's nowhere for us to go but up from here. And so hopefully there's a comeback on the horizon. But I would tend to agree that the forgotten men and women of Maine are coming back, and it'll depend on the ability of us to find a Trump or a JD Vance or
Mhm.
some a charismatic young statesman or stateswoman who can channel the frustrations that people are having with the government over the last 6 years. But the staffer in question, Jeremy Kennedy, who lost his temper at a White House chief of staff's meeting, the
Mhm.
governor's office denied that he used profane language, but didn't really deny that he stormed off. One of the staffers who was at the meeting just was on a local radio show and confirmed that he did indeed say "bleep you, you bleepity bleep." But a very polite person from the Trump administration was reminding Jeremy Kennedy, the chief of staff, that the state needs to comply with these executive orders. This is federal law, and the state will lose federal funding if they don't comply. Jeremy very professionally got up and said, "Bleep you bleep and bleep," and stormed
Mm.
out. For everybody who's been involved in Maine politics, this was not a surprise. This is very on character. Kennedy's been a volatile person in politics. Republicans have loathed having to work for him or work with him, rather, instead of just speaking directly to the governor. And they sent a letter basically calling for an investigation into how he's
Mhm.
treated people as her chief of staff. His husband, Matt Moonen, is the Democrat majority leader in the House. So there's very close relationship between the House Democrats and the governor's office. They work hand in hand, and both of them have prior careers in one for Equality Maine, a nonprofit that advocates for transgender policies, abortion, previously to that, same-sex marriage. And Jeremy worked for Planned Parenthood for a number of years before he signed on to work for Governor Mills. So these are people who have been kind of steeped and stewed in hard left institutional progressivism. And
Mhm.
they brought their attitudes with them, got a chance to grab onto the political levers of power, and
Yeah.
made it happen. We've got 9-month abortion, we've got taxpayer funded trans procedures, we've got boys playing against girls in sports, boys in female prisons. We've got the whole enchilada, the whole progressive wish list of policies has been implemented here in Maine. And look what we have to show for it.
Yeah, illicit marijuana farms run by Chinese international crime syndicates. We didn't even get to the fact that, what is it, 13 or 15% of Maine forests are now owned by Canada, which is unreal that we allow foreign nations to own any of our land. And again, I highly recommend people go. It's mainewire.com. Go read these stories at mainewire.com, because what's happening in Maine, alone, I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning. The petri dish for where these radical leftist policies happen is first California, but before they can be exported, the playbook has to be written. Okay, how does a different state that's not California implement these? What is the political strategy to get these policies into law? And that happens in Maine. That's happening in Maine the last 5 years before it's then exported to the rest of the country. So Maine is the gateway, a gateway drug in a sense to bringing cultural Marxism to your neighborhood and your school and your church and your wallet. So highly recommend that you go to Mainewire. Steve, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for the invite, Liz.
Okay, guys, we're going to talk about Dan Bongino. He's going to be deputy director of the FBI. Some of you guessed this. Some of you guessed this because if you are a listener of Dan Bongino's show, his tone had changed in the last couple of weeks, and he'd had a lot of guest hosts. And eagle-eyed viewers, you are eagle-eyed viewers, you guessed that maybe he was in an interview process for a high-ranking position. Well, you were correct. He accepted President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel's request that he serve as Deputy Director of the FBI. And I have a video I want to show you of Dan Bongino in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about American Heart for Gold. Thanks to Biden, remember that guy? He has completely disappeared. Like, gone. He's totally gone. Where is he? Nobody knows. The US dollar, thanks to Biden, is facing unprecedented inflation. And as if that wasn't scary enough, globalists are trying to control us by controlling our money. They're telling us it's a digital dollar, but we know that it is just like the Chinese communist social credit score system. If it is a digital dollar, the government can turn it off or force you to do something or not do something with your money in order to manipulate your behavior. That is why it has never been more important to take control of your wealth. Don't let your life savings become a casualty of failing banks or currency wars or controlling politicians. Now is the time to call the only precious metal dealer I trust, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. My husband and I did this. A portion of our wealth portfolio is now in physical precious metals. American Hartford Gold is a great company. They support content like this that's committed to bringing you the truth. So tell them that I sent you, and they'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first order. You can call them now. Click the link in the description of this episode or call 866 996 5172. That's 866-996-5172 or text Liz to 998899. Again, the phone number is 866-996-5172 or text Liz to 998899. Okay, let me talk about Dan Bongino for a minute because Dan Bongino is one of the nicest guys in the business. He has always been extremely helpful and gentlemanly and encouraging to me, especially as I transitioned from years ago working for a news network to going independent and launching this show. Dan Bongino was nothing but responsive to questions I asked him at the beginning because he's so successful. I would argue the most successful independent podcast in the country on the right, and was always so responsive, so helpful, so encouraging, just a really nice guy, but also very knowledgeable about what he does, very courageous about what he speaks about. He did a lot of reporting, uncovering the truth about the Russia hoax, and the fact that he is going to be now holding those people accountable who inflicted that weaponization of the FBI on you, the American people. To call that poetic justice would be the understatement of the year. And this is what Bongino gave us, just a little bit of a peek, I would say, into what we can expect from him as deputy FBI director before he announced that he had accepted this position. But behind the scenes, he was in talks. He thought that he was going to be asked to serve in this position. He had this to say, again, prior to being appointed, but just a little bit of a peek into what we are going to now see with him at the FBI. Take a look.
Particularly good mood today. If you only knew. You ever hear that House on Fire song? It's one of his old songs. This guy's on fire, just like the Bailey song. That house on fire. He is on fire, Schiff. 100% success rate of failing. Why is Adam Schiff so worried? Folks, I strongly encourage you to go back and take another look today at the Russia collusion hoax. I know it's a story that's old and a lot of people want to move on. I'm going to be straight with you. I don't want to move on. We had the FBI, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, officials in Congress, foreign governments, and intel people, fabricate a story, invent a story that could have caused and done serious long-term harm to international relations with a nuclear-powered foe. It's kind of a big freaking deal. I'm not letting it go. And you listen to me. This is going to be very important in the coming days. I'm not letting this go. I want to find out what happened because it can never happen again. Not to a Democrat, not to a Republican, not to a Libertarian, not to any United States citizen. You do not get to alter or try to change the course of electoral politics by fabricating a story, hijacking the justice system then to give the patina of truth to a fake story. You don't get to do that. Why do I bring that up now? Because who is the ringmaster of that circus? Yes, Adam Schiff. And no, I'm not letting it go.
That was just days before he made the announcement that he had accepted the position as deputy FBI director. And he said, listen to me, this is very important, and it will be very important in the coming days. What does that mean? It means that we might see accountability. It means that Adam Schiff will not get away with what he did, weaponizing the justice system. Think about how many hours we have spent talking about that, or we spent in the past talking about Bruce Orr and Christopher Steele and Michael Flynn and, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, all of these people that took over the FBI and the DOJ and used that as a weapon against Trump because Trump represented you. Well, if I'm any one of those people right now, I'm quaking in my boots because Dan Bongino is on your trail and his mission is justice. Congratulations, my friend. Congratulations to Dan Bongino. Did you ever think that we would live to see the day where Kash Patel would be FBI director and his deputy would be Dan Bongino? We are living in a dream, an absolute dream. Thank you all for watching today. If you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you are following on X. That's x.com/Liz_Wheeler. On YouTube, we are youtube.com/Liz_Wheeler. Also, make sure you're signed up for the newsletter, LizWheelerNewsletter.com. It's where we drop tidbits of information, research, and editorials that you guys tell me you really like. So I can say you guys really like. Go to LizWheelerNewsletter.com. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.